Caracas, September 23, 2025. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has issued one of his starkest warnings yet about rising tensions with the United States, claiming Washington's military presence in the Caribbean could ignite a war that spreads across the continent. Speaking in a nationally televised address, Maduro portrayed recent U.S. deployments near Venezuelan waters as reckless and provocative, accusing Washington of using false narratives to justify aggression. His remarks came as pro-government supporters and members of civilian militias marched through Caracas, waving Venezuelan flags and chanting slogans against U.S. President Donald Trump. Maduro opened his address with a pointed declaration about the stakes of the current standoff. Nicolás Maduro said, "This false narrative seeks to impose a state of violence in the Caribbean and South America and threatens to escalate into a catastrophic war in all of our continent. An attack on Venezuela would be the beginning of a catastrophic war in the Caribbean and South America." The statement, broadcast simultaneously in Spanish, underlined the Venezuelan leader's strategy of casting his country as the front line in a broader geopolitical battle. He claimed that Washington was seeking to destabilize the region with accusations of drug trafficking and organized crime, charges his government has repeatedly dismissed as fabricated. The tension has been simmering for months. U.S. naval patrols in the Caribbean, ostensibly to disrupt narcotics trafficking routes, have expanded, coinciding with renewed sanctions against Venezuela's oil industry. In Caracas, Maduro and his ministers see this as part of a larger plan to weaken the government economically, sow domestic unrest, and ultimately prepare for foreign intervention. Analysts note that the optics of U.S. destroyers in waters just off Venezuelan shores are difficult for Maduro to ignore, particularly as he seeks to project strength at home. On the streets, government supporters framed the moment as a patriotic duty. Demonstrations in Caracas featured banners reading "Hands off Venezuela" and "We will defend our sovereignty." Militias, wearing civilian clothes but carrying rifles, marched in formation, symbolizing Maduro's reliance on a broad mobilization of society. Maduro used the address not just to condemn Washington, but also to rally Venezuelans around what he described as a constitutional duty to resist. Nicolás Maduro said, with the proposal that has come from the first constitutional decree for the entire nation, the entire republic, all institutions, every man and woman, citizen of this country, to have the support, protection and activation of all the forces of Venezuelan society. The decree he referenced, announced earlier this week, formalizes the role of civilian militias as an auxiliary force to the armed forces. The militias, already numbering in the hundreds of thousands, have been trained to respond in case of foreign aggression or domestic uprisings. By emphasizing the participation of every man and woman citizen of this country, Maduro sought to portray the defense of Venezuela as not just a military obligation, but a collective mission for the entire population. The backdrop to Maduro's address is the Trump administration's intensifying pressure campaign. Just days earlier, President Donald Trump publicly accused Maduro of running the largest drug cartel in the Western Hemisphere and hinted at all options on the table if Venezuela continued to resist international demands. Washington's narrative has centered on allegations that Venezuela's ruling elite profits from cocaine shipments moving through its territory. U.S. officials claim that senior figures in the Venezuelan military and government are directly implicated in trafficking networks. Maduro, however, dismissed the accusations as politically motivated, aimed at creating a pretext for intervention. By linking the charges to what he called a false narrative, he suggested that Washington is deliberately escalating tensions to justify its military buildup in the region. The mobilization of militias in Caracas was carefully choreographed for both domestic and international audiences. State television broadcast footage of thousands of Venezuelans marching with banners of Simón Bolívar, chanting against imperialism and pledging loyalty to Maduro. Analysts believe such displays are designed to signal resilience, to demonstrate that Venezuela is prepared for a prolonged standoff and that ordinary citizens are willing to defend the revolution. The government's message was clear. Venezuela's crisis is not just between two presidents, but between two systems, one that resists foreign intervention and another that seeks to impose it. Maduro's framing of the crisis as continental rather than national is deliberate. By stating that an attack on Venezuela would be the beginning of a catastrophic war in the Caribbean and South America, he sought to broaden the stakes. The warning taps into historic memories in Latin America of U.S. interventions, from Central America in the 1980s to the Dominican Republic in the 1960s. Venezuelan officials argue that if Washington proceeds against Caracas, it could destabilize neighboring Colombia, Brazil, and beyond, potentially drawing the region into conflict. Regional leaders have remained cautious, while some governments, particularly Colombia, have echoed US criticism of Maduro. Others, including Mexico and several Caribbean states, have called for dialogue and restraint. For Maduro, the speech was not only about confronting Washington, but also about consolidating domestic power. By invoking the threat of a catastrophic war, he reinforced the idea that his leadership is indispensable in safeguarding the nation. Observers note that framing Venezuela as a besieged fortress has long been a key tactic of his administration. In times of economic crisis, hyperinflation, and international isolation, rallying citizens against an external enemy provides a unifying narrative. The introduction of a constitutional decree further expands his control, bringing civil institutions, the military and militias under a single chain of command. The date of the speech was no coincidence. On September 23rd, world leaders gathered at the United Nations in New York for the General Assembly. While Maduro was not physically present, his address from Caracas was timed to coincide with global discussions on peace, security, and multilateralism. The message was intended not only for Venezuelans, but also for international observers, that Venezuela views itself as a victim of aggression, not a perpetrator of instability. By invoking the entire republic and all institutions, Maduro positioned Venezuela as unified in the face of external threats. Beyond geopolitics, the speech resonated emotionally with many Venezuelans. After years of sanctions, shortages, and political turmoil, the threat of war only deepens uncertainty. Yet for some, Maduro's fiery words offered reassurance that the government remains defiant. Marchers in Caracas were seen holding portraits of fallen soldiers, chanting against Trump and declaring their readiness to defend the revolution. For them, Maduro's words were not abstract warnings, but a call to protect their homes, families, and livelihoods. Still, critics inside Venezuela argue that invoking the spectre of war is a dangerous gamble. Opposition figures warned that the government risks heightening paranoia and militarizing daily life even further. The confrontation between Venezuela and the United States now raises a larger question. Can the Caribbean and South America avoid sliding into open conflict? Maduro insists that Venezuela is the target of fabricated accusations meant to justify foreign aggression. Washington insists that Caracas is a hub of criminal networks destabilizing the region. Between these narratives lies a region caught in uncertainty, where miscalculation could have devastating consequences. As Maduro put it bluntly, this false narrative seeks to impose a state of violence in the Caribbean and South America and threatens to escalate into a catastrophic war in all of our continent. In his September 23rd address, Nicolás Maduro positioned Venezuela as both victim and bulwark, a nation facing an existential threat, yet prepared to resist through the mobilization of its people. His words, carried on Venezuelan state television, were aimed at rallying citizens, warning adversaries, and reminding the world that Venezuela's crisis is not confined to its borders. Whether the standoff ends in diplomacy or escalates toward confrontation remains uncertain, but Maduro's stark warning that any attack on Venezuela could trigger a catastrophic war in the Caribbean and South America underscores the fragility of peace in the region.